Well, restaurants are bulking under the pressure, with many having closed since the initial lockdown last year. Now more are facing the same fate. Restaurants are operating at half capacity or not at all, as they're restricted to deliveries and takeaways under the current level 4 lockdown. The sector is calling on government to allow it to reopen fully in order to save livelihoods. eNCA's Monique Mortlock is speaking to restaurants in the city of Cape Town, and she joins us live. And we also have Heidi Giokos in Johannesburg. I'm going to start with you, Monique. We spoke a little earlier. You spoke to one of the restaurant owners who is basically saying that they are going to have no choice but to close some of their establishments.
Yes, Maseko, the restaurant owner I spoke to a little earlier, Marvin Haddon, he in fact already has closed 2 of his restaurants. He only has 1 left, that's Roxy's in Gardens, and he was telling me that even though he's struggling and he's trying to keep head above water, he last week started a feeding scheme or a feeding initiative to help struggling restaurant staff, those in the hospitality industry who are without jobs. So he provides them with meals with the help of Beef Eater Gin, and it's quite amazing because I've heard this from various restaurant owners that those who have been able to stay open, that they are now helping other restaurant owners and their staff because they feel they are all in it together, and that's the only way they can survive. If you can see behind me, a restaurant owner who I was going to speak, that's the owner of Art Cafe. She's unavailable at the moment, but she was telling me that she's had to close. The pandemic has hit her so hard that she's been unable to open because even with takeaways and deliveries, that wouldn't have been sustainable for her business. And just driving around the Cape Town CBD, we've seen roughly a dozen restaurants like this one that have had to close, some permanently. We've heard from the Restaurant Association that they've received calls from at least 1,000 restaurants across the country that have had to close permanently due to the pandemic. And all the restaurant owners who I've spoken to are fearing the worst. They are fearing that when President Ramaphosa speaks to us again, that he's going to extend these regulations, extend the regulations specifically to the hospitality industry, where no sit-ins and no alcohol servings will be allowed. And they say that those who've been able to keep their doors open may not be able to do so for much longer.
Monique, I'm going to move from you in Cape Town to Heidi Giokos in Johannesburg. Heidi, what are these restaurant owners telling you about the anxiety that they feel every time they hear that there's going to be a family meeting soon?
I think the anxiety is extremely heightened every time there is an announcement that the president is going to speak, or when there's an increase in COVID-19 cases. And Naseko, you touched on something important in the previous live crossing where you said, how does one balance lives versus livelihoods? And I think the people that we need to speak to and get a clearer sense on how hectic the situation has been and how tough it's been is those that are working on the ground in these restaurants. We are joined by Hawa and Melu. Thanks so much for your time. I think if we can just start with you, Hawa, just explain to us how tough it's been. Every time there's a new announcement by the president, it seems as though the Restaurant Association is one of the sectors that are hardest hit. How tough has it been for you on the ground?
My name is Hawa. I work at Old Duck French Cafe and for West Pine Slopes. It's very hard. But for tonight, we are just hoping for the best. I hope the president will say something which is positive. But the lockdown really affected us in many ways, especially if you are a breadwinner. Like me, I have kids, I have extended family, I have to feed. So it's very tough for me if I don't have food. And the extended family, also they don't have food. So it's very hard for me. And now, especially on our tips, it's about 98% low. So we don't have any income. We don't have the landlords want the rents. And the kids are the one that fees. Right now, my daughter, she's in matric. So I have to make sure that all the fees is paid up to date so that she can go to school. But if I don't have income, it's very hard for me.
Sure. And then, Melo, maybe you can also just tell us about your experience and how, you know, as a waiter, you adhere to all the rules and regulations and the protocols, and making sure that those that come and dine do feel safe and the protocols are adhered to. Also speak to us how tough it's been for you because of all these restrictions.
My name is Melo. I'm from Old Tak as well. So this pandemic of COVID has gave us tough times each and every time. We were struggling with everything that we try to put in our tables. Our families, we feed so many people, extended families as well. So we're struggling with many things to do, and the income of ours is not coming out. We struggle because we also want the customers to come in. Our tips has dropped to almost 98%. Now we're getting almost 2%. So how come we survive with such things? And we do have the families. Now I had a problem with my kid. My kid was in an incident, so it's very painful for us. So we're hoping for the president to open today. Hopefully we'll open tonight.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. And Masako, I just want to ask Brazil to just show you how empty another restaurant, which is next to the French Cafe, owned by the same owner that we interviewed a short while ago, Giokos, another restaurant that's empty and is hoping, the staff here are hoping for the president to possibly allow some kind of normality to return to these restaurants. It's extremely tough for all of them. As you heard, many people, their tips have dropped, and it's just a really tough environment to be in. But of course the president is in a more difficult position, because how does one balance lives versus livelihoods?
All right, Heidi, I want to end with you, Monique, in terms of the fact that the restaurants have to, the restaurant owners have to be closing their establishments. It's quite heartbreaking to watch, especially the people who lose their jobs. But at the same time, those of us who are the customers also, you know, suffering from your cabin fever, for instance, wanting to actually go to these restaurants to eat with friends, etc. Have you spoken to any ordinary South African about you know, this level of the lockdown and how anxious they are about the president speaking soon?
You know, Maseko, we've heard from people who are reliant on customers coming to these restaurants, just your average shop owners, people who rely on the restaurant industry to be busy so that they can have feet in their stores, your normal shops that just sell groceries, even stationery shops that are situated close to these restaurants, because here in Cape Town specifically, the restaurant industry plays a crucial role in supporting other shops, feeding into the economy. And not only are customers suffering, a little earlier when we were at Roxy's Cafe, we saw customers buying coffee, some takeaway pastries, and customers were talking about how they miss just sitting and chatting. At the one cafe where we were standing, people were still milling around, chatting to one another, enjoying their coffee. Obviously, no seats were available for them to sit. No gatherings are allowed, as we know. And you could just see that hunger, because here in Cape Town especially, it's that getting together and that coming together. And it's just as Heidi said, government is in a tough position to balance lives versus livelihoods. But what the restaurant industry is saying is that they understand the need to curb further infections. They understand the need to fight COVID-19, and they will adhere to whatever restrictions government imposes on them. But what they're calling on is for government to relax regulations, to allow them to have sit-ins, or to allow them to at least serve alcohol, because they say this is a big driver in terms of getting supporting their finances and supporting their business. So the customers suffering, and also all of those shops that they feed, that the restaurant industry feeds.